There are humiliations so quiet that no historian ever records them. They arrive not with raised voices or shattered glass, but with gentle laughter floating beneath crystal chandeliers, with fans lifted to conceal knowing smiles, and with whispers soft enough to escape accusation while leaving wounds that linger for years. Such humiliations were the favored weapons of respectable society, and on one radiant spring afternoon in rural England, Lady Helena Ashcombe became their chosen target. The annual spring fete at Holler Hall had long been the pride of the county. Noble families arrived in polished carriages lined with gleaming brass, while village folk gathered beyond flower-covered hedges, eager to glimpse elegant gowns drifting across emerald lawns. White tents billowed beneath a cloudless sky. Long tables overflowed with fresh bread, honey tarts, sugared fruits, lavender biscuits, and ornamental cakes adorned with spun sugar flowers that shimmered like tiny sculptures beneath the afternoon sun. At 44 years of age, Helena stepped quietly among them, carrying no masterpiece crafted by fashionable London confectioners. Resting carefully within a simple wicker basket lay her grandmother's seed cake, fragrant with butter, lemon zest, and fragrant caraway seeds. Its appearance possessed little grandeur, yet every careful slice carried memories of warm kitchens, patient hands, and generations who believed love was measured not by extravagance, but by devotion. She wore a modest dove-gray walking dress trimmed with ivory lace that had been mended so skillfully no stranger would notice its age. Her dark chestnut hair, touched only lightly by strands of silver near her temples, rested beneath a straw bonnet decorated with tiny pressed violets gathered from her own garden. She neither sought admiration nor expected applause. She merely wished to contribute something honest. The judging had scarcely begun when laughter drifted from a gathering of fashionable ladies surrounding Lady Beatrice Holloway. Widowed herself, yet nearly 15 years younger than Helena, Lady Beatrice possessed the polished confidence of someone accustomed to admiration. Every jewel she wore sparkled almost as brightly as her carefully rehearsed smile. "My," she remarked sweetly while studying Helena's basket from a comfortable distance, "how delightfully rustic." Another lady leaned closer. "A seed cake. I thought such things disappeared with our grandmothers." A third added with a delicate laugh, "Perhaps affection may still be baked into them." The women exchanged amused glances. Lady Beatrice sighed dramatically. Poor Lady Helena. Some ladies collect suitors. Others collect recipes. The circle erupted into restrained laughter. Someone behind them whispered just loudly enough to carry. Old maids always imagine kindness might accomplish what beauty no longer can. Another voice answered. They bake because there is no husband waiting at home. Even several younger ladies lowered their eyes awkwardly, unwilling to join the cruelty, yet lacking courage to oppose it. Helena heard every word. Her fingers tightened around the basket's woven handle until her knuckles whitened. Still she smiled. It was not the smile of happiness. It was the practiced smile of a woman who had spent years learning that dignity often meant pretending not to bleed. When the judges approached, she quietly withdrew her entry before anyone could taste it. No explanation, no complaint. Only a graceful bow before she slipped away from the crowded lawn toward the quieter gardens bordering the estate. Few noticed her departure. One man did. From a terrace overlooking the fete, Duke Nathaniel Holler observed the entire exchange without interruption. At 54, his broad shoulders still carried quiet strength despite years shadowed by grief. His black morning coat sat impeccably upon him, yet there remained something distant within his thoughtful gray eyes, as though part of him still wandered beside the late Duchess, whose absence echoed through every room of Holler Hall. He had attended countless gatherings since her passing 3 years before. None had interested him. None until now. He watched Helena disappear beyond the climbing roses. Then, without another glance toward the festivities, he descended the stone steps and followed the winding garden paths alone. The farther he walked, the quieter the estate became. Birdsong replaced conversation. The scent of roses yielded to hawthorn blossoms and damp earth. Beyond an ancient fountain carved with weathered cherubs, he finally found her. Helena knelt beside the stone basin, scattering crumbs among a gathering of timid robins and sparrows. The birds accepted her company without hesitation. Unlike society, they asked nothing except gentleness. She looked up in surprise as the Duke approached. "Your Grace, I fear I interrupted distinguished company." She glanced toward the birds. "They are considerably less demanding than guests in silk gowns." A faint smile appeared upon his face. "I cannot argue that." Silence settled comfortably between them. After a moment, Helena opened her basket. "I withdrew this before the judging." She hesitated. It would be unfortunate for it to go entirely uneaten. She offered him a neatly wrapped slice. "If your Grace would care for some seed cake." Nathaniel accepted it with genuine gratitude. The buttery fragrance carried memories older than titles or estates. He tasted it. His eyebrows lifted. Then he laughed. Not loudly, not mockingly, simply with delighted surprise. "My dear Lady Helena," he said warmly, holding the second bite as though reluctant to waste even a crumb, "if I were 10 years younger, I should have asked you to marry me before finishing the second slice." For one startled heartbeat, they simply stared at one another. Then Helena laughed. A real laugh. Soft, musical, and entirely unexpected. Color touched her cheeks. "I believe, Your Grace, that history would consider such a proposal highly unconventional." "History," he replied with twinkling eyes, "has always underestimated excellent baking." Their laughter faded gently into comfortable silence. Neither spoke again. Neither noticed the figure watching from the terrace beyond the roses. Lady Beatrice lowered her opera glass slowly. Her pleasant smile disappeared. Before sunset, the Duke's harmless joke had already begun its dangerous journey through every drawing room in the county. Morning arrived wrapped in soft mist, yet before the dew had vanished from the gardens of Holler Hall, words spoken in innocent laughter had already traveled farther than any carriage upon the county roads. In villages, manor houses, and elegant drawing rooms alike, the tale grew with every retelling. By noon, the Duke's playful remark had become an almost certain proposal. By evening, some insisted that secret courtship had been unfolding for months beneath everyone's unsuspecting gaze. Such was the peculiar talent of respectable society. It could transform kindness into intrigue before the tea had grown cold. Lady Helena Ashcombe remained blissfully unaware of the rumors for exactly one day. The following afternoon, she walked into the village bakery to purchase fresh flour, only to discover conversations stopping as she crossed the threshold. Smiles appeared too quickly. Bows lingered too long. Even the baker's wife addressed her with unusual excitement. "My lady," she whispered, "how wonderful that happiness may yet arrive when one least expects it." Helena blinked in confusion. "I beg your pardon?" The woman merely smiled knowingly. "Oh, never mind. We shall all hear the announcement soon enough." Bewildered, Helena gathered her parcels and returned home carrying more questions than provisions. Meanwhile, within the imposing stone walls of Holler Hall, Duke Nathaniel found himself equally puzzled. His steward presented invitations from neighboring estates, requesting congratulations before any engagement existed. Distant cousins wrote curious letters asking whether a new duchess would soon preside over the family seat. Even his solicitor discreetly inquired whether revisions to the household inheritance might become necessary. Nathaniel sighed. "It appears," he murmured dryly, "that everyone has arranged my future except myself." Mrs. Agnes Wilton, the faithful housekeeper who had served the family for more than 30 years, allowed herself a knowing smile. "People often mistake kindness for romance, Your Grace. And if it becomes romance," she looked at him carefully, "then people shall merely discover they guessed correctly for entirely the wrong reasons." Her words lingered long after she had departed. The Duke wandered into the estate's library, where sunlight filtered through tall stained-glass windows, casting pools of sapphire and amber across polished oak floors. Upon a side table rested a finely crafted silver cake knife that had belonged to his late Duchess. The blade bore delicate engravings of wildflowers, while its ivory handle had grown smooth through years of affectionate use. Nathaniel lifted it thoughtfully. His wife had treasured generosity above appearances. She would never have tolerated the cruelty displayed during the fete. Without further hesitation, he summoned his secretary. "Have this polished." "Yes, Your Grace." "And include a note." The secretary unfolded fresh stationery. Nathaniel considered his words carefully before writing only a single sentence. "For the finest seed cake ever baked." Nothing more. No flourish. No explanation. Simply gratitude. The following morning, the Holler carriage arrived before Helena's modest cottage. The coachman stepped down, carrying a velvet case wrapped with cream ribbon. Helena accepted it with astonishment. Inside rested the gleaming silver knife. Her fingers trembled. She unfolded the accompanying note twice before believing her own eyes. Mrs. Harriet Collins, her elderly neighbor, happened to witness the elegant carriage departing. Within an hour, the entire village knew the Duke had sent Lady Helena a personal gift. By supper, the story had expanded into whispers of jeweled necklaces and handwritten love letters. By nightfall, Lady Beatrice Holloway had heard every exaggerated version. She crushed her teacup so forcefully that fine cracks spread across the porcelain. "Over a cake," she muttered bitterly. "Over a ridiculous little cake." Determined not to surrender her ambitions, she increased her visits to Holler Hall. She arrived wearing magnificent gowns imported from Paris, carrying expensive wines, rare books, and carefully rehearsed sympathy. Yet every conversation with the Duke ended politely, briefly, and without warmth. Nathaniel thanked her graciously, then returned to estate matters. His thoughts drifted elsewhere. Several days later, while inspecting improvements to the village school, he unexpectedly encountered Helena arranging fresh flowers donated for the classrooms. "You have brightened the entire building," he observed. She smiled. "The flowers deserve the credit." "I disagree." They walked together beneath ancient chestnut trees, whose blossoms drifted lazily upon the breeze. Their conversation wandered effortlessly from literature to music, from childhood memories to forgotten recipes preserved in fading journals. Neither mentioned marriage. Neither attempted flirtation. Instead, they shared something rarer: ease. Nathaniel found himself laughing more frequently than he had since his wife's passing. Helena discovered that silence need not always feel lonely. Children playing nearby noticed first. "Look," one little girl whispered. "The Duke is smiling." Her mother glanced toward the pair and quietly nodded. "I had almost forgotten he could." Yet happiness seldom escapes envy. Lady Beatrice invited several influential ladies to afternoon tea, where concern disguised itself as compassion. "I fear," she sighed dramatically, "that poor Lady Helena has unintentionally encouraged false hopes." Another guest frowned. "Surely not deliberately." "I pray not." Beatrice lowered her voice. "But grieving gentlemen may become vulnerable to comforting attentions." The implication spread like spilled ink. Within days, respectable matrons suggested Helena had manipulated the lonely Duke through carefully planned kindness. Anonymous letters reached Holler Hall warning Nathaniel against fortune hunters. One newspaper in London even hinted that an ambitious gentlewoman had enchanted a widowed nobleman using domestic charms rather than noble birth. When Mrs. Wilton quietly placed the article upon his desk, the Duke read every insulting line. His jaw tightened. He folded the newspaper once, then again. Finally, he set it into the fire. "It appears," he said calmly, "that society has mistaken decency for weakness." That afternoon, he gave unexpected instructions to his coachman. "Prepare the state carriage." "Your Grace." "We are calling upon Lady Helena." "In private, sir?" Nathaniel looked toward the great front windows overlooking the busy village road. "No." His expression became wonderfully resolute. "We shall arrive in full daylight." As the magnificent carriage rolled through the village toward Helena's cottage, every curtain twitched, every shopkeeper stepped outside, and every whisper suddenly fell silent, for the Duke of Holler had chosen not to hide his friendship from the world, and no one could yet imagine what courageous consequence that single journey would soon bring. There are places where time seems unwilling to continue. Forgotten gardens, abandoned chapels, empty conservatories, and weathered stone benches possess a curious gift for preserving echoes long after voices have faded. Deep within the eastern grounds of Holler Hall stood such a place, hidden behind climbing ivy and ancient yew hedges. The old glasshouse had once been the pride of the late Duchess, a sanctuary overflowing with climbing roses, fragrant jasmine, and delicate orchids gathered from distant shores. Since her passing, no gardener had possessed the heart to restore it. When Duke Nathaniel invited Lady Helena to accompany him there, he offered no explanation beyond a quiet request. "I should like to show you somewhere few have entered in many years." She accepted with gentle curiosity. The morning carried the sweetness of early summer. Sunlight filtered through drifting clouds, while blackbirds filled the hedgerows with cheerful song. As they followed winding gravel paths, Helena noticed wild roses reclaiming forgotten arches and ivy embracing cracked stone walls with patient determination. Nature had transformed neglect into unexpected beauty. Nathaniel unlocked an iron gate whose hinges protested softly. The glass house stood before them like a sleeping memory. Many panes had fractured, allowing climbing vines to weave themselves through rusted frames. Ferns flourished where polished marble once reflected elegant gatherings. Yet despite the years, the air remained warm beneath the weathered glass, scented faintly with roses that refused to surrender. "My wife loved this place," Nathaniel said quietly. Helena did not answer immediately. Some grief deserved silence before comfort. Together, they wandered among broken stone pathways where scattered blossoms still appeared between patches of moss. Bees drifted lazily through shafts of golden light. Somewhere beyond the cracked roof, a robin nested safely above the forgotten world below. Nathaniel paused beside an old wooden bench. She believed every wounded plant deserved another season. Helena rested her gloved hand lightly upon the bench. She must have been a remarkable lady. She was. He smiled gently, and remarkably stubborn. The warmth in his voice carried affection untouched by bitterness. Helena found herself smiling as well. "I suspect remarkable women often are." He laughed softly. "I believe you may have proven that observation yourself." The compliment lingered between them without embarrassment. Instead of shrinking from it, Helena met his eyes with quiet honesty. "I have seldom been called remarkable." "Then society has been astonishingly blind." They continued walking until they reached the center of the glasshouse, where an empty stone fountain stood surrounded by climbing white roses that had somehow survived years without care. Nathaniel drew a slow breath. "I have avoided this place because I feared happiness itself." Helena looked at him with gentle concern. "I do not understand." He folded his hands behind his back. "When my wife died, everyone told me time would heal grief." He smiled sadly. They neglected to mention that healing often feels like betrayal. The confession settled heavily within the quiet air. "I feared that if I laughed again, I had loved her too little." He looked toward the broken ceiling where sunlight streamed through shattered glass. "If I found peace, perhaps I had forgotten her." Helena's voice remained almost a whisper. "And have you?" "No," he answered without hesitation. "I think of her every day." He turned toward Helena. "But now I wonder whether remembering someone faithfully requires living sorrowfully." She considered his words carefully before speaking. "My father once told me that love worthy of remembrance leaves blessings behind, never prisons." Nathaniel closed his eyes briefly. "I wish someone had told me that 3 years ago." For several moments, neither spoke. The silence felt comforting rather than awkward. At last Helena gathered enough courage to reveal a truth she had hidden for decades. "I stopped believing anyone would ever choose me." His expression softened. "When I was younger, gentlemen admired prettier ladies." She smiled faintly. "Then they admired wealthier ladies." A quiet breath escaped her. "Eventually, they admired younger ladies." She lowered her eyes. One becomes accustomed to hearing that one is sensible, dependable, kind, and entirely forgettable. Nathaniel stepped closer. "I have never found you forgettable." She looked up. Emotion shimmered within his steady gray eyes. Before she could answer, Mrs. Wilton appeared at the entrance, carrying a carefully wrapped parcel. "I hope I am not interrupting." "Not at all," Helena replied. The housekeeper smiled knowingly. "I believe this belongs here." She placed the parcel into Helena's hands before quietly withdrawing. Inside rested a faded recipe book tied with pale blue ribbon. Nathaniel recognized it instantly. My wife's handwriting. Mrs. Wilton's note lay inside. She always wished the recipe should be shared with someone who baked with love rather than pride. Helena looked toward Nathaniel. "May I?" He nodded silently. The following afternoon, she returned carrying another seed cake, prepared faithfully from the treasured recipe. Its familiar fragrance filled the old glasshouse before the first slice was served. Nathaniel accepted it carefully, almost reverently. One taste carried him backward through years of joyful breakfasts, quiet conversations, and laughter beside the woman he had once believed he could never honor again by smiling. Tears gathered unexpectedly. "It tastes exactly as I remember." Helena reached gently across the table. "I hoped it would bring comfort." "It does." He swallowed carefully. "But not because it reminds me of loss." His voice grew steadier. "It reminds me that love leaves gifts behind." Their hands remained only inches apart. Finally Nathaniel spoke the words his heart had carried for weeks. "It was never my age that stood between us." He reached carefully for her hand. "Only my fear." Their fingers met. Warm, certain, honest. Before another word could be spoken, hurried footsteps echoed through the glasshouse. Lady Beatrice swept dramatically through the open doorway, followed by two astonished footmen. Her smile gleamed with triumphant certainty. "Excellent," she declared. "You are both precisely where I expected." Nathaniel slowly released Helena's hand, but never stepped away from her side. Lady Beatrice lifted her chin proudly. "I have invited half the county to Holler Hall tomorrow evening." She allowed the announcement to settle. "They shall witness your long-awaited engagement." Helena stared in disbelief. Nathaniel remained perfectly calm. Then, with quiet authority that silenced every echo within the shattered glasshouse, he answered only once. "Indeed." His steady gaze never left Helena. "Then they shall witness the truth instead." Even before sunset, elegant carriages streamed through the wrought iron gates of Holler Hall in an unbroken procession. Lanterns glowed along the winding drive, their golden light reflecting upon polished coach doors and gleaming harnesses. Ladies stepped gracefully onto the marble entrance beneath sweeping silk gowns of emerald, sapphire, and ivory, while gentlemen in perfectly tailored evening coats exchanged curious greetings. No invitation had explained the occasion, yet everyone believed they already knew. Rumor had confidently supplied what courtesy had omitted. Inside the great ballroom, crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across polished oak floors. Musicians performed gentle waltzes from the gallery above, though conversation easily drowned the orchestra. Every cluster of guests whispered the same expectation. "The Duke will finally announce his engagement." Lady Beatrice has waited patiently. "It is only proper." Lady Beatrice herself entered with radiant confidence. She wore shimmering silver satin adorned with seed pearls, her dark hair crowned by sparkling diamonds inherited from her mother's family. She accepted admiring glances as though already accustomed to becoming Duchess of Holler. Every graceful movement proclaimed quiet victory. Yet one expected guest remained absent. At her modest cottage, Helena stood before a small mirror fastening the plain pearl brooch that had belonged to her grandmother. Her dove-blue evening gown possessed neither costly embroidery nor fashionable extravagance. It was beautifully made, but unmistakably simple. She hesitated. "I should not attend." Mrs. Agnes Wilton, who had personally arrived with the Duke's carriage, smiled kindly. "My dear lady, there are evenings when attendance is merely polite." She stepped closer. "And there are evenings when dignity deserves witnesses." Helena lowered her eyes. "They will laugh, perhaps." Mrs. Wilton gently adjusted Helena's sleeve. "But laughter has never altered the truth." After a long silence, Helena drew a steady breath. "Very well." The carriage carried them beneath a sky glowing with the last blush of sunset. When it stopped before Holler Hall, dozens of curious faces turned toward the entrance. Murmurs spread instantly as Helena stepped into the brilliant light. Some ladies exchanged surprised glances. Others concealed smiles behind painted fans. Lady Beatrice watched from across the ballroom, perfectly certain this unexpected arrival would only make the coming triumph sweeter. Trumpets sounded softly. The musicians fell silent. The great staircase became the center of every gaze as Duke Nathaniel Haller descended with measured confidence. He wore black evening dress trimmed with understated elegance, yet grief no longer shadowed his expression. For the first time in years, his face carried unmistakable peace. He greeted his assembled guests with courteous warmth before raising one hand. "My friends." The ballroom settled into perfect silence. "I thank you for accepting my invitation this evening." He paused thoughtfully. "Recent weeks have provided this county with abundant conversation." Gentle laughter rippled through the crowd. Nathaniel smiled faintly. "I regret disappointing those who prefer mysteries." Several guests glanced toward Lady Beatrice. She lifted her chin proudly. "This evening," the Duke continued, "I wish only to speak honestly." He descended the final steps and crossed the ballroom until he stood beside Helena. She looked at him with quiet uncertainty. He offered his arm. She accepted. Together, they faced the gathering. 3 years ago," Nathaniel began, "I believed my happiest days had ended forever." His voice remained calm, yet deeply sincere. "I performed my duties faithfully, attended every expected gathering, and thanked every well-meaning friend." He looked around the room, but I had forgotten how to laugh. Many guests lowered their eyes respectfully. Then, during our spring fete, someone placed a humble slice of seed cake into my hand. Soft smiles appeared among villagers standing near the back. It was not elaborate. He chuckled gently. It possessed no spun sugar towers nor imported decorations. Looking toward Helena, he continued. It carried only kindness. He reached into a nearby servant's basket and lifted the familiar silver cake knife. This simple gift reminded me that comfort often arrives wearing ordinary clothes. He turned fully toward Helena. "My lady." Emotion brightened his steady eyes. "That afternoon, I made what many believed was a joke." Gentle laughter stirred again. "I said that, were I 10 years younger, I should have asked you to marry me before finishing the second slice." The ballroom waited breathlessly. Nathaniel smiled. "I have spent many sleepless nights considering those words." His voice grew warmer. "I eventually discovered they were entirely wrong." Complete silence followed. I did not require youth. He took both of Helena's trembling hands. I required wisdom. A tear escaped Helena's eye. Nathaniel continued softly. 10 additional years were necessary, not to make you worthy of me." He shook his head, "but to make me wise enough to recognize the extraordinary woman standing before me." Several ladies quietly reached for their handkerchiefs. Lady Beatrice's confident smile vanished completely. Nathaniel lowered himself onto one knee. Gasps filled the ballroom. Never had a Duke of Haller publicly humbled himself before anyone. "My beloved Lady Helena Ashcombe." His voice never wavered. "You restored laughter where sorrow had built its throne. You reminded me that loyalty to yesterday need never forbid happiness tomorrow. You taught me that love asks not whether spring arrives early or late. It simply blooms when hearts are finally prepared to receive it." He gently removed a small velvet box from his coat. Inside rested a graceful ring set with a single sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. My first words were foolish. A tender smile touched his face. "Permit me better ones." He slipped the ring into his palm. "Helena, will you honor me by becoming my Duchess, my companion, and the greatest blessing the remainder of my life could possibly hold?" For one heartbeat, she could not speak. The room disappeared. The whispers vanished. Only the man before her remained. At last she smiled through shining tears. "Yes." Her answer barely rose above a whisper. "With all my heart, yes." Thunderous applause erupted throughout the ballroom. Even many who had once repeated cruel gossip found themselves cheering with genuine emotion. Lady Beatrice quietly lowered her eyes. Without bitterness or dramatic protest, she slipped unnoticed from the hall, understanding at last that titles might be pursued, but love never could be. Mrs. Wilton wiped joyful tears from her cheeks. "I knew," she whispered. "I simply knew." Months later, Holler Hall welcomed guests for a very different celebration. The annual spring fete returned, yet this time the grand prize honored not expensive confections, but the finest homemade seed cake. Noble families stood beside village bakers without distinction, laughing together beneath flowering chestnut trees. The Duchess Helena personally presented every contestant with warm thanks, while children carried slices to elderly guests before serving themselves. As evening sunlight painted the gardens with soft gold, Nathaniel accepted the first slice from Helena exactly as he had on the day everything changed. A curious young boy asked, "Your Grace, why does everyone treasure such an ordinary cake?" The Duke smiled at his Duchess before answering, "Because the greatest miracles rarely arrive wearing crowns." He raised the slice gently. Sometimes they arrive wrapped in simple paper, offered by kind hands, and shared with a heart brave enough to accept them. Together they walked slowly through blooming roses, hand in hand, while the last light of day settled over Holler Hall, proving to every soul who witnessed them that love was never measured by youth, beauty, or perfect timing, but by the quiet courage to recognize home when it finally stood before your heart.